Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How is your heart today? Is your heart kind? How is your mind? Is your mind calm and clear? Today we're going to talk about relapse and the typical reaction that happens when a person returns and has had a relapse. I'm not going to put my personal assessment into it as much as I'm going to read excerpts from chapters in the big book and excerpts from chapters in the 12-step and 12 tradition book that I believe apply. Let's get started. I have notes. What I'm about to read, is very important about relapse. Page 35 in the big book. Page 35 at the bottom, the last paragraph. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. And we're going to get into the answer shortly. He had made a beginning. His family was reassembled and he had begun to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Let me repeat that. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. What does that mean? Page 85 in the big book. This is under the chapter titled Into Action. So he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. What does that mean? We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. Our attitude toward liquor. Have you watched my last couple of videos about describing the radical extreme departure from the basic tenets of AA principles, where most people live in fear? We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. Listen to this. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and secure. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. The problem, our attitude toward liquor, it's been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. Our attitude towards liquor You know, like that fear if I miss a meeting, I'm going to drink. We are neither cocky, I go to meetings every day, nor are we afraid if I miss a meeting, I'm going to get drunk. That is our experience. This is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So far, I talked about the person that made a great beginning, got drunk, had a relapse, and they concluded he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Failed to enlarge his spiritual life. What else about alcohol? Our attitude toward it, right? That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. It says on page 85, what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Let me repeat that. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, right? He failed to enlarge his spiritual condition. This is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And what we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our what? Spiritual condition. Here's a clue about your spiritual condition. Maintenance. Page 25. This is under the chapter, There is a Solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the steps, the leveling of our pride, the steps, the confession of shortcomings, the steps, which the process requires for its successful consummation. To be successful, to enlarge your spiritual life, to be in fit spiritual condition, there's a solution. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved. Could you even imagine saying at a meeting, the problem's been solved? How is the problem solved? By enlarging your spiritual life. How is the problem solved? Staying in fit spiritual condition. How is this problem solved? Maintenance of our spiritual condition. When therefore we were approached, still on page 25, when therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. What are the spiritual tools? You've heard this mentioned, a spiritual toolkit. You know, those tools are required to have a daily reprieve. The contingent, our sobriety, our spirituality is contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual kit. So we have spiritual tools, the 12 steps. Page 164. what I'm about to read. I'm putting it in the context of someone comes in. They've been in the program for a while or maybe a long time. Okay? And what's the response by other people? Well, you stop going to meetings. Some people dare say this: thanks for keeping it green for me and doing the research. Are you applauding yourself, and are you gleeful, thanks for doing the research, that this person got drunk? Oh, here's another one. A relapse starts way before it happens. A relapse starts way before it happens. Was there ever a discussion at meetings about your theory that a relapse starts long before it happens? Besides going to meetings every day, because I'm reading about how the problem was solved by spiritual maintenance every day using spiritual tools. But if you're that wise and you know that it starts way before, what do you have to offer? Thanks for keeping it green for me. I'm glad you got drunk and I didn't. Page 164. Ask him, God, capital H, or your higher power, the universe, the All-Father, the Great Spirit. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. Are you doing that every day in your morning meditation? Are you asking God in your morning meditation, your higher power, the All-Father, the Creator of the universe, the Great Spirit, are you asking him or her, however you believe, what you can do each day for the man who is still sick? For the man that failed to enlarge his spiritual life? Are you asking your higher power what you can do for the man that failed to enlarge his spiritual life? Are you asking God in your morning meditation how to help the man or woman who was not maintaining their spiritual condition? How you help that person? Are you asking your higher power in the morning in your meditation, like it says right here on page 64, how can you explain to that person the spiritual tools available besides meetings? Okay? Are you doing that? Well, here's what it says. Here's what it says in our book. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. But you ever hear somebody say at a meeting, when somebody says but, everything after that is bullshit? It's in our book. But means also, however, all those things. It's an interjection. But obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. What could you transmit to the person who relapsed? The problem's been solved. How? Enlarge your spiritual life. What do you mean? All we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. What's that? Pick up the spiritual tools, the toolkit laid at your feet. But you can't transmit that if you haven't got it. Your focus is somewhere else, not on the basic tenets of this program. Page 76 in the 12 and 12. Page 76 in the 12 and 12, step 7. The 7th step is where we make the change in our attitude, which permits us, with humility as our guide, to move out from ourselves towards others and toward God. We're not self-centered anymore. Thanks for keeping it green for me. The 7th step is where we make the change in our attitude, which permits us, with humility as our guide, to move out from ourselves towards others and toward God. The whole emphasis on step 7 is on humility. It is really saying to us that we now ought to be willing to try humility in seeking the removal of our other shortcomings, just as we did when we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. If that degree of humility could enable us to find the grace by which a deadly obsession could be banished, then there must be hope of the same result respecting any other problem we could possibly have. I remember when I was new, I came in 88, and I was still having the thought of drinking, going into obsession about having a drink. And I called my sponsor at the time, and he knew me pretty good by then. Actually, he was a friend I used to drink with. And he says, why don't you pray? Why don't you ask God to remove that obsession? So I followed his suggestion, and I did that. And at some point later that day or the next morning, I called him and said, that worked. The obsession was removed. I asked God to remove the obsession to drink. And then he said to me, that same higher power could help you with all your problems, which is what I just read here. Some of our problems are, or a lot of them are, or most of them are, shortcomings and character defects. If that degree of humility, I can't stop this obsession, so I'm going to do what my sponsor suggested and pray to have it removed. If that degree of humility could enable us to find the grace by which such a deadly obsession could be banished, then there must be hope of the same result respecting any other problem we could possibly have. Problems other than alcohol. Google it. AA, problems other than alcohol, and it's going to take you to the big book where it talks about bottles were only a symbol. We had to get down to causes and conditions. But now we're talking about humility, okay? Humility. The 7th step is where we make a change in our attitude, which just permits us, with humility as our guide. So the bottom of page 76 in the 12 and 12 mentions humility a few times. Page 70 in the 12 and 12. Page 70. Humility, as a word and as an ideal, has a very bad time of it in our world. Not only is the idea misunderstood, the word itself is often intensely disliked. Many people haven't even a nodding acquaintance with humility as a way of life. Much of the everyday talk we hear and a great deal of what we read highlights man's pride in his own achievements. I'm going to talk about that in another video. You know, stay sober and you'll get back all those things you lost, the material things. So let me read this again. Talking about humility now. Humility is a word and as an idea. And listen, you could go back and watch this video, and I'm not saying that because I make money. I could have these videos monetized. I don't. I'm not here for money. Humility as a word and as an ideal has a very bad time of it in our world. Not only is the idea misunderstood, the word itself is often intensely disliked. Many people haven't even a nodding acquaintance with humility as a way of life. Much of the everyday talk we hear and a great deal of what we read highlights man's pride in his own achievements. Page 71. In all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of humility. Our crippling handicap isn't that we stopped going to meetings or we missed a meeting. You can't live in that type of fear. In all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of humility. We had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first. Let me repeat it. We had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first. Spiritual values had to come first. Why did that guy get drunk? They believe he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He wasn't in fit spiritual condition. Remember I read it? It wasn't explained, or he didn't experience. All we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. How do we maintain our spiritual condition? I read it to you. We pick up the toolkits, the tools that people who the problem had been solved, that I read in our book, the big book. And one of those tools now we find is humility. In all these strivings, page 71, in all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of humility. We had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. I'm going to make a video on it. Stay sober and you'll get all these things back that you lost, like a country and western record. You just play it backwards. We had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. What is humility then, as it pertains to the AA program or the 12-step program? What is humility? Is it defined in any of these books? Let's go to page 58. Step 5. You know, when you take your 3 lists from step 4, resentment, fearless, sex conduct list, and you take them to your sponsor, spiritual advisor, counselor, minister, priest, rabbi, whoever you choose to hear your 4th step, those 3 lists, the resentment list, the fear list, and the sex conduct list. Another great dividend we may expect, page 58 on step 5. What is humility? Another great dividend we may expect from confiding our defects to another human being is humility, a word often misunderstood. To those who have made progress in AA. How do you make progress in AA? Who are those people that made progress in AA? They enlarge their spiritual life. They stay in fit spiritual condition. They do that by maintenance every day of their spiritual condition. They use the tools available. What's humility? Page 58. To those who have made progress in AA, it amounts to a clear recognition of what and who we are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be.